In Season 5, Necromancer's popularity has absolutely plummeted. We've gone from being the second most popular class to potentially even the least popular currently. And I wanted to figure out what happened. So I met with a lot of the top Necromancers. I met with Bioboy, I met with Gazi, I met with Sirach, I met with Garm, I met with Kay. I met with a lot of people, and as a result of my conversations with them, I wrote this document and I had them give me feedback on it, and we discussed it and we deep dove into this and we made a lot of iterations. And as I went to record this video, I started to realize that while this document is very accurate, actually most of Necromancer's issues can be traced back to one thing. See, the reality is, no matter if you fix the balance issues, even if you fix the bugs, even if you fix a lot of the things that are broken about the class, you won't be fixing one of the major problems. And I think one of the main contributors, if not the main contributor for why so many people are quitting Necro, which is the skill tree. Every other class in the game has a lot of skills in their skill tree. Maybe not as much as they want, but they have a lot. Necromancer has the least, and it has the least by a huge margin. And if you look at it here, if you count them, Spiritborn has 24, Druid has 25, Barb has 23, Rogue has 22, Sork has 24, and Necro has 18. That means Necromancer is 5 skills behind the average. And when you first see that, you might be thinking, okay, Necromancer has 5 less damage skills to choose from. What's the big deal? The problem is it's not damage skills, it's utility skills. And the result of this is that Necromancer's builds all play exactly the same. Every single Necromancer build plays Blood Mist, every single Necromancer build plays Decrepify, and every single Necromancer plays Corpse Tendrils. And if they can't play those 3 skills, they just choose to play no skills, right? Those are your 2 options, okay? You can either play these 3 skills or you can play no skills. Then you might be looking at this tree and you might think, well, there's a few more skills than that. Well, Bone Prison actually doesn't really function outside of Bone Spirit, and it functions well in Bone Spirit, but that's pretty much the only build that can play it anymore. And Iron Maiden isn't playable in a single endgame build, and it hasn't been since Season 0. There has never been an endgame build that has played Iron Maiden. And so what you're left with is exactly what I just described. And then you get to pick an ultimate. And the ultimates have their own balancing issues, but I think overall the ultimates are kind of fine. I wish that they were a bit better, but ultimately, we do also get an ultimate. So what every build is devolving into, or has devolved into for the last 5 seasons, is Blood Mist, Decrepify, Corpse Tendrils, Damage Skill, Ultimate. And that's the build. That's every Necro build since Season 0. And I think, frankly, people are just bored. Necro is missing out on that deeper level of customization of your character. Skills should represent different ways to play. They should make you better or worse at different content. They should be ways to optimize and refine a build, or even just customize it to play the way you want it to play. But because Necromancer doesn't have any options of what to play, if you get bored of Decrepify and Corpse Tendrils and Blood Mist, well, there's nothing else for you. There are a few more issues with the skill tree that go beyond just number of skills. Necromancer also has the least number of passive abilities, and if I remember correctly, I think we have 3 less passive than the next lowest amount, which means that it becomes very difficult to spend your points. Whenever you're creating a Necromancer build, pretty much, for example, if you make a Bone Spear build, pretty much every Bone Spear build is going to allocate its points in almost the exact same way, because there's just not much else you can do because there's so few passives to choose from. And on top of that, there's another layer to this that actually, I think, if you compare it to Sword, compared to Barb, you compare it to a lot of the other classes, they don't have this issue, which is our elemental specific. So our Shadow, our Bone, our Blood passives only work with those skills. There's no way to make Gloom work in a Bone build, and none of these Shadow skills work. None of the Bone skills work. None of the Blood skills work. And as a result, you are even more constricted. So not only do you have less skills to choose from, but your passives are also way more restrictive and way more predetermined, I would say, compared to other classes, because you can't really mix and match. Now, the final issue with the skill tree comes from the key passives. Now, Ossified Essence is actually, I think, fairly cool. Ratha's Vigor has finally found a spot in the metagame, but there's a huge issue with Shadow Blight. And I think before we get into that, I also do want to mention Necromancer also currently has the least number of key passes, okay? So just to drive that point home, Necromancer has the least number of skills by a good margin, we have the least number of passives by a decent margin, and we have the least number of key passives. The result overall is just a fairly boring skill tree that I think people, after playing this class for over a year, are just bored of it and want to play something else. But I do want to talk about Shadow Blight, and I also want to talk about Callan's Edict. So Shadow Blight, if you don't know, makes it so that every 8th time you do shadow damage, you just do a flat amount of damage. Now, Shadow Blight is, I would consider it to be the worst key passive in the game across any class. This key passive does almost nothing for Shadow builds. Historically, the only reason why any build really valued Shadow Blight at all was to pair it with the Blighted aspect to get a massive damage multiplier. So effectively, you were taking Shadow Blight to get access to Blighted aspect. But with Blighted aspect being nerfed so heavily, this flat damage from Shadow Blight really doesn't contribute much of anything to a Shadow build. By my calculations, it's roughly 1 to 5% damage depending on the build. 1 to 5%. You compare this to like Ossified Essence, which is typically like 60 or 70%, Wrath's Vigor, big multiplier. Shadow Blight is the worst key passive in the game, and this is a huge reason why Shadow builds this season are completely unplayable. Kalen's Edict, I would say, is also undertuned. In my opinion, optimized minions still don't play Kalen's Edict. They didn't play it in Season 4. I don't believe you played it in Season 5 either. You were just better off playing Shadow Blight and getting the Blighted aspect for 50%. There's contention here, but I do believe that Kalen's Edict is also incredibly weak, though not as quite as weak as Shadow Blight. So the result of what we just laid out is that, every Necro build ends up playing the same because you have to pick the same skills. And then for your key passive, certain archetypes like Shadow are just completely invalidated because their key passive is so weak. And when you're customizing your skill tree, it's not like other classes you get to pick between offense and defense because you have extra passives. You can pick resource generating stuff. Necro just doesn't really have options to choose to solve problems. As a result, I think Necromancer's tree is incredibly boring. And I think that players in general are just kind of bored of it. And I think that's a major reason why people have stopped playing the class as much. Now, a lot of you are probably very optimistic about Vessel of Hatred. Now that I've laid this out, you're probably thinking, well, Vessel of Hatred should solve a lot of these problems. Well, we had data mines that happened that ended up being very accurate, we know, because the Spirit-Born tree was leaked. And without getting into specifics, because I don't want to spoil stuff for you guys, Necromancer is getting 2 passives and 1 active, but the active seems to not be utility from what I can tell. It seems to be another core skill. And the concern is that Necromancer is going to be the exact same in Vessel of Hatred. And I find this to be, well, frankly, very concerning, but also pretty sad. I love Necromancer, man. I absolutely love this class. I've been playing it for over a year now, and I intend to play it in Vessel of Hatred, and I'll always play Necromancer. But the state of the class does make me a bit sad. And I just want to close this video by pointing something out. This might be a beacon of hope, or it might be the thing that makes you realize how dire things actually are. So Gruesome Mending is a passive Necromancer has that gives you 10% healing per point. In the Spirit-Born tree, they have a passive called Nourishment. Nourishment gives you 25% increased healing per point, so 2.5 times as much, and it gives you a 10% damage multiplier per point, which is as big as Necromancer's biggest damage multiplier in their skill tree. So is Necromancer going to get buffed to this level, or are we going to get left in the dust playing our same old 3-skill builds with our terrible passives? We will see. I'm hoping that, things get better over time, but, we'll see what happens. But thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.